Okay, so for the quick summary of the first 10 chapters, we discussed two souls. We discussed that every soul has the inner core, which we would call the 10 soul powers, 10 sphirot, intelligence and emotion. And then it has the garments, thought, speech, and action. And both souls have it. And last week we discussed the fact that both souls are fighting over one city, like the metaphor of two kings fighting over one city. Each one wants complete dominance and complete control. Not only dominance, it doesn't want to have to really, in its perfect world, if you ask the godly soul, what's your dream? What's your utopia? Utopia is that the love to God is so powerful that it would spill over to the animal soul, and the animal soul also loves God. And then anytime this animal soul, anytime the God, throughout life, a person, the godly soul won't have to battle with the animal soul because all the impulses will be to holiness. So that was and the animal soul wants the opposite. So that was last week of chapter 10. Now, to chapter 9, the two cities, what each one would want. Now that we have everything we need to know, we know the makeup of the souls, we know the 10 powers, we know the garments, we know what each of them wants. Now we talk about how does reality play out? What really happens? And here we get to really going back to the first page of Tanya, and we're going to talk about the three categories of people based on the definitions of Tanya. And more specifically, it's 5 categories because we have righteous, we have wicked. Wicked is the wrong word in this context, but we have Rasha, which is commonly translated as wicked. And then we have the Beinoni, the intermediate person. And then if you look at the sources in the first page of Tanya, there is within the Tzadik, there is a Tzadik that is complete Tzadik and an incomplete Tzadik. Within the wicked, there is a completely wicked and incompletely wicked. And then there's the intermediary. So now what we're going to say now is that based on the definitions that we have of the souls and what the soul wants, etc., now we can try to figure out, based on how the battle actually plays out within different people, that's the various categories. Okay. Now, most of the book really is for the intermediary person. So especially this chapter 10, when you read it on the surface level, it's not really relevant to us because it's going into the 2 categories of righteous people, which the average person is not righteous by this definition. So you could think about it and say, well, we have to understand the spectrum to know where we are on the spectrum. So Tanya chapter 10, what we're going to study today, is about the 2 levels of righteous. Tanya chapter 11 is the 2 levels of wicked. And then Tanya chapter 12 is the intermediary person. But we're going to get a little deeper and we're going to see it's not so simple because in some ways we're all a tzaddik. So hang on to that thought. We'll come back to it next week or the week after. Okay, fine. So that is introduction number 1. In other words, summary and then where we're headed. Let's go back to the first page of Tanya. What's the problem? What was the problem with the conventional definitions? The conventional definition is that when a person is mostly righteous, 51% sin, mitzvot, good deeds, he's righteous. If a person is mostly wicked, 51% wicked, he's labeled wicked. And if he's 50-50, he's intermediary. That's the conventional definition. So when I say one person's a tzaddik, I say, wow, must be a tzaddik. Does it mean he never sinned? No, it means that 99 that he's a majority righteous. That's the conventional definition, and it's a true definition. In the sense that Rabbi Shneur Zalman calls it the borrowed terms. In other words, the Talmud refers to that as a tzaddik, not because it's really a tzaddik, but because you're righteous in your judgment. In other words, when God judges you, you're judged as righteous. But that's not the essence of a righteous person. That's not the real definition. How do I know? So here we go back to the questions that we raised in the first page of Tanya. The first page of Tanya, we find the sources that say that if a person sins once, doesn't matter if it's a big sin or it's a small sin, doesn't matter. A person sins once, they're wicked. If they do teshuvah, they're righteous. Okay? But if one sin, you're wicked. Now, if one sin, I'm wicked, so it has raises a whole bunch of questions, but the bigger question is, if one sin, I'm wicked, so what's the intermediary? What's the Beinoni? I'm in between what? One sin makes me wicked. So what's the intermediary? So now, this was the problems that we had in the first page of Tanya. So now what we're going to say, based on all of that, our definitions, now we understand what's happening here. Because the question becomes now, where is the battle? And what we're saying is as follows, what we're going to say. The righteous person, the Tzadik, and the Beinoni, and the intermediary person are both the same in their garments, in their thought, speech, and action. Because if you do one sin, you're wicked. We'll talk about that next week. So they're in complete control of the garments, thought, speech, and action. That's not what differentiates between a righteous person and the Beinoni and the intermediary person. It's not what differentiates. It's not what they do. It's not what they think. It's not what they speak. That's the three garments. And the garments, they're equal. The difference is, and what makes a person righteous, and that's why it's so unusual, is within the souls. And the point here is that while there is a struggle between the animal soul and the godly soul in the intermediary person, there is no struggle between the godly soul and the animal soul in the righteous person. Why? Because when the righteous person, he has no more animal soul, or the animal soul no longer is negative. The animal soul also loves God. That's the difference. And that now we understand why the big difference between a tzaddik and a beinoni, and the tzaddik and the intermediary person. It's nothing to do with what they do. If you do something wrong, you're not righteous, you're not intermediary. The question becomes, where is your battlefield? Is the battlefield only in the garments? In other words, you're a beinoni, you're an intermediary person. Your two souls are battling over the garments, thought, speech, and action. Then you're an intermediary person because you have multiple, you have the opposing impulses. A tzaddik has no opposing impulses. All he wants is good. That's what a tzaddik is. Now, it's a long chapter because there is a complete tzaddik and an incomplete tzaddik. And it gets into the difference between the two. What is incomplete tzaddik? If a tzaddik means I have no negative impulses, so how could there be two grades in that? Either I do have negative impulses or I don't. The tzaddik has no negative impulses. So what does it mean that tzaddik it's not complete? So we have to get into that. So we're going to spend time figuring out the two points of a tzaddik, the two types of tzaddikim. Now, why are we doing this? It's not really relevant to most people. It's relevant, first of all, it's important to know, like I said, the spectrum, to understand what a tzaddik is, what a rasha is, and figure out to understand the spectrum. But as we will see later, hopefully at the end of today, we'll also get to that, is that it could be even important to us. But that's the big idea. The big idea is when the conventional interpretation of tzaddik is, if I'm mostly good deeds, I'm righteous. The deeper, the Tanya's definition of tzaddik is, if I don't have any negative impulses, I'm a tzaddik. It's a whole different story. One way to think about it is, if I had no impulse control, zero, I just automatically do any impulse that rises within my heart. The righteous person, what would that look like? He would just do everything, only do things that connect him to God, because there's no negative impulse. So that's the righteous person. So that's the big idea here. That's the tzaddik. And like I said, then we have to get into the two categories of the complete tzaddik and incomplete tzaddik. So let's do that. Let's do that right now. We'll go into the two categories. And then if anybody wants to comment. Oh, one more thing I was going to say before I get into the two categories. The Hasidim of the Alter Rebbe, most of them, of course, never studied Tanya. See, the problem is I've been studying Tanya since I'm 13, so you don't see the perspective before and after pictures. But all the Hasidim of the Alter Rebbe were basically grew up as non-Hasidim. So when they came and they started studying the Tanya, they described what impact it made on them. And one of the very famous Hasidim said like this. He says, before I studied Tanya, I was sure I'm a tzaddik. I'm sure I'm righteous. After I studied the Tanya, halavai beinoni. I wish I could be a beinoni. I strive to be a beinoni. Because what is a beinoni? As we will see, a beinoni intermediary person doesn't mean I can sin 50%. One sin makes me wicked. All right, do tshuva, I'm righteous again. But that's not what it means. What it means, the beinoni, is that I am complete control of my thought, speech, and action. In other words, I don't actively think or speak or do anything that is inconsistent with the divine soul. That's a very high level. But I'm not righteous because I have impulses. I have negative impulses because my animal soul is still present. So all the definitions go out the window. In other words, it's a whole nother spectrum, because it's not only that we're looking at, are you doing the right thing? Are you thinking the right thing? Are you speaking are you speaking the right thing? That's garments. Both the tzaddik and the Beinoni have perfect garments, perfect control of the garments. But what makes me a tzaddik is not the question of garments, but the question is, what's happening within my heart? Is there the battle between two souls? Then I'm an intermediary person. If there's no battle between the two souls, then I'm righteous. Okay, so that's for that. Now let's look at the spectrum of the two types of tzaddikim. And the complete tzaddik is easy. The complete, I don't know where to start from. Where does the Alter Rebbe start from? Just to let me take a quick peek. I'll follow his lead, and then. Oh, he says like this. The Alter Rebbe starts with the incomplete tzaddik. What's an incomplete tzaddik? I have no urge. I have no urge to do anything negative. Animal soul is gone. However, there's still minuscule levels of the animal soul, of negativity. Not enough to make it a negative urge, so I don't feel it. But there's still a minuscule amount of negativity within the incomplete tzaddik. You see, in the Talmud, the incomplete tzaddik is called tzaddik she'enoi gamur, a tzaddik that's not complete. But it's also called tzaddik v'raloi, tzaddik and is bad to him, as opposed to tzaddik v'toivloi, tzaddik that is good to him. The conventional interpretation is that there's two types of righteous people. One, that God does good for the person. In other words, a righteous person in the world that doesn't suffer. And then there's a tzaddik that it's bad for him, that the righteous person who suffers. But the way we are interpreting it, no. The complete tzaddik is the one who is toivloi, only has good within him. The incomplete tzaddik, viraloi, has bad within him. But the bad is so minuscule, it doesn't bother him. What's the example? The example is, I don't know, there's toxins in the air, there's toxins in the water, there's toxins in everything. But if the amount is so minuscule, and you can only discover it in the lab, so you don't sense it, you don't feel it. Doesn't mean it's not there, but it's so small that it doesn't affect you. That's the incomplete tzaddik. The complete tzaddik has no traces of negativity at all. And like Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe explains, what does that mean? Because what's the difference? How do I know if what's the difference if there are trace parts or not trace parts? It's not really relevant, seemingly. But he says, no. He says like this. He says the complete tzaddik, because there's complete transformation, so what was the animal soul has been transformed to positivity. And the power to love God and the desire of the animal soul for self-pleasure now becomes a desire to love God. So the point here is, it's not just that the incomplete tzaddik only has traces of the negative. The complete tzaddik has no negativity, and the incomplete tzaddik only has traces of negativity. No, in the complete tzaddik, those traces of negativity are no longer traces because they have been transformed. Doesn't disappear, right? The animal soul doesn't. The animal soul doesn't disappear. Either it's dissolved and separated and scattered and so small that it's so trace amounts that you can't feel it, or it is transformed that it actually becomes a motivation to love God. And that's the difference between the two levels of the tzaddik, as Rabbi Shneur Zalman discusses at length. One more interesting point that he talks about the fact, what's the test? He says, he gets into this at some length. He talks about the more you love God, the more you despise and you're repulsed by something that's against God. And therefore, the tzaddik that's not complete, his love to God is not complete. How do you know that? Because his repulsion of the negativity is not complete. Because the love is the opposite of the hate, of the repulsion. If something is if I really love you, then I'm repulsed by something that is against you. Now, an average person could love God and love physicality at the same moment. Even though the books of Musar say you can't. They say fire and water can't be in the same cup. Love to God and love to the world can't be in the same cup. But that is not, we have to understand what that means. I could love God and I could love a piece of pizza together at the same time. Why? Because there's two different souls. The love of God is the godly soul. The love of the physical is the animal soul. I could love both. But if I had one soul, then if my love to God was genuine, then I would not be able to tolerate something that is against God, the opposite of God, Sitra Achra, the other side that conceals godliness. So the test, the completely righteous person, because his love to God is complete, therefore the opposite is his repulsion of the physical that is not holy is absolute and complete because it has been completely transformed. So this is, and then we get into more details, the difference between the different levels of the tzaddik, and we get into two definitions, in other words, two distinctions of the complete tzaddik and how they're interrelated. But that will leave for the Alter Rebbe to do for us. We'll read it inside. But in the meantime, anybody wants to comment or raise a point, question, please do. Otherwise, you read it inside. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, I don't know. I'm hoping it's going to be addressed later. But how do the external circumstances influence the tzaddik? For example, if the tzaddik find himself in the environment that doesn't have knowledge of God, but he feels inside that there is a God, but he's taught that the God is not existent. Or how does the absence of the animal soul affect tzaddik in the real life? You can be like son of Aaron, or even worse, just don't want to have anything that cannot survive. I was just wondering if he talks about that.
Yeah, he doesn't say it explicitly. Let's talk about the second one is easier. The tzaddik, as you mentioned in Tanya chapter 7, all physical material, the klipas noiga, the klipa of light, is neutral. And the question of whether it becomes holy is only a question of the person's own awareness. So if I engage in the physical world in order to serve, to give me the strength to serve God, then it becomes holiness. So the tzaddik is not against it. The tzaddik is not against eating lunch. To the contrary, for the tzaddik, in fact, the Beinoni has a harder time eating lunch because it's a battle, right? For the tzaddik, because I have no negative impulses, then when the tzaddik sits down to eat breakfast or to go to work or to work out, whatever he's going to do for his health, the question is, what is the impulse? What does he want this? What does he desire? He desires his closeness to God. And like we said, for most of the world, Tanya chapter 7, most of the world, the question of whether or not it is holiness, the question of whether or not it is a positive experience is a completely subjective one depending on the person, right? We have mitzvot that no matter what you think, it's God's will. You do the mitzvah, you connect it to God, it's holiness. We have the things of the three unholy klipot, the sins, unholy klipot. Doesn't really matter what your intention is. If you engage in this is inconsistent with God's will. The rest of the world is the klipa of light, which is most of the world, and whether or not it's a holy experience is completely subjective. So if I'm engaging in it driven by my animal soul, it's the klipa of light. If I'm engaged in it driven by the godly soul, it's kedusha, it's holiness. It doesn't even, remember we discussed chapter 7, chapter 8, it goes down to unholiness, then it comes back up. That's if I don't have the awareness. If you're a tzaddik and you have the awareness and you're doing it to be able to serve God, it's holiness from the outset. So whatever you do, we discussed this last 2 weeks ago when we discussed on Wednesday, the Sikha of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, the world is a negative place he wants to escape. Rabbi Shmuel is a righteous person. He's not, if you're righteous, if you're completely righteous and you have no negative impulses from the inside, right? Our biggest problem is the inside. Forget about your first question was about external challenges. Those are easier. The internal challenge, if you're a righteous person, if you're Rabbi Yishmael, you're not running away from the world. What's the problem? What's the problem? There's physicality in the world. Physicality is a vehicle to serve God. Because he doesn't have any negative impulses, the klipas nega, the klipa of light, becomes kedusha. So he's in an environment of holiness. What's the problem? For the Beinoni, that same lunch is a battlefield. It's not holiness, it's a battlefield, right? So he wants out. in a sense, the godly soul of the Beinoni, you see what I'm saying? The short answer is that the tzaddik, he's quite happy in this world. At least the type of tzaddik like Rabbi Yishmael, the type of tzaddik we're discussing. Go ahead, Bob, please. Oh, your first question is a little bit more complicated to ask. What if somebody did not grow up in with the knowledge of the Torah? How does his godly soul speak to him? There's no question that his godly soul is still if he would be a righteous person, the impulse would be only for good. What he knows about the goodness is a different discussion, but his impulse for good would be only for good.
But it can be exploited then.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, but so that's why we have checks and balances. The righteous person also has checks and balances because his engagement in the physical world is all for holiness and to serve God. Oh, you're saying if he had no checks and balances from the Torah? Yeah, the righteous person is guided by the Torah. So, is he going to give away all his money? No, the Torah says not to. Right? So you see what I'm saying? I'm saying if you're living, if you have the Torah as the guide and you're tzaddik and you have no negative impulses and no personal interest impulses, you're still going to be balanced because the Torah gives you the middle path, the path of balance. Go ahead, Bob, please.
You know, chapter 10 in a 52 chapter book is relatively early. Does the Tanya risk alienating their reader by
Yes.
unrealistic idealization? I mean, even you, a man with a long beard and who studies Talmud every day, would probably not consider themselves a tzaddik.
For sure not.
So,
For sure not.
exactly. So, you know, aren't they risking losing their reader because it's hard to identify with a tzaddik in chapter 10. I mean, you know, it's
here. So let's go back to the purpose of the book. Purpose of the book, as laid out by the compilers, by the introduction. You had people trying to become good people, tzaddikim, righteous people. Or let's forget about the terms. People who are engaged decades in self-improvement. They want to become better people. And the frustration was that you can't do it. They wake up in the morning after decades of trying to be a better person and they have negative impulses. So what do they tell themselves? Obviously, everything I did was for naught. What's the purpose of the book? The purpose of the book is to say, my friend, welcome to the club. Welcome to humanity. You are a Beinoni. You're an intermediary person. You're the person that there will always be a battlefield within your heart, between the two souls, between the two impulses. And the Tanya is going to help you manage that battle and inspire you to manage that battle. That's why we have 53 chapters. But in the process, we want to say, is there a goal? So basically, everyone, you guys are all climbing up the wrong tree. Everybody who's trying this, who for them spiritual growth means I wake up in the morning and I'm in tranquility and I have no negative impulses. What the Alter Rebbe is saying, my friends, you're climbing up the wrong tree. It's impossible. And it's not what God, not only it's impossible, it's not what God wants from you, for most people. It's not what God wants for you. You're on the wrong tree. Is it wrong? Now, these people are, for 30 years, are trying to get to that point where I have no negative impulses, but I wake up in the morning and I don't want things that are repulsive, and I don't want things that are negative, and I don't want things that are against God's will. Now, so the Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, is it wrong that as an idealization, this is a concept, it's a true concept? Yes, but you will see, complete tzaddik, the Gemara says, the Talmud says, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, how many righteous people are there? Well, there's a few thousand. He says 18,000. But you know what? The higher, complete righteous person, he says there are few, is a handful. Rabbi Shneur Zalman also quoted it in the first chapter. Quotes the Talmud that says, God saw that the righteous people are few and far between. He planted he planted them throughout the generations. Right? We don't have enough to put a few in each generation because we're going to run out of them. But so we have to have it both ways. On one hand, we're saying as does this concept exist? Is there a concept of a tzaddik where someone is basically even on earth, living in paradise, in the sense that he's complete transformation and no battle within themselves? Is that a concept? Yes, it's a concept. That's a complete tzaddik, but it's the minority of the minority. We're not talking about one in a billion. Most people, like you say, Alter Rebbe has to cultivate the image of the Beinoni, explain to the Beinoni the battlefield that takes place within the person, not to try to eliminate the battlefield because it's an impossibility. So putting chapter 10 is basically in some way saying, this is chapter 10. This is the righteous. This is what you've been dreaming for 30 years. By the way, don't do it. You're not going to get there. It's not for you. So painting that picture is actually identifying what the fantasy of the Jew and saying, my friend, wake up. It's a nice fantasy. In other words, for most people, it's not that it's a fantasy. It's not your life's mission. What is Rabbi Shneur Zalman going to do? He's going to teach you, if you stick around to the end of the book, and if you implement the book, he's going to teach you to appreciate the battlefield, to how the practical tools to engage in the battlefield, and most importantly, the inspiration necessary to succeed in the battlefield. But you're right, on the simple reading, the Tanya chapter 10 is saying this is the goal, but it's not for us. Don't try to climb up the wrong tree. That's answer number one. I have another answer, but first tell me what you think about this one, and then I'll give you the other answer.
I was going to just say few. I guess I'm still into the book. I can still keep going.
Okay, good. Yeah, we didn't throw anybody out. Okay, but now we're going a little deeper, and I really wanted to save it for next week because next week we're all going to be depressed because what happened to that chassid who said, I thought I was a tzaddik, and now I realize that halavai, I wish I'm a Beinani. Why does that come? It comes from chapter 11, because chapter 11, we're basically going to say, all of us, not you, present company excluded, me, most people are very comfortable in the level of a Russia. Wicked, that is good for him. There's complete wicked. No, we're not completely wicked, but we are all wicked, good for him, strive to be a Beinani. So if you walk away from Tanya chapter 11, you're basically saying, I'm wicked. The problem is you can't think you're wicked because the first page of Tanya, we quoted the Talmud that says, don't be wicked in your own estimation. So we have to deal. So I was really saving this for next week, but I'll say it now. In some ways, you are a tzaddik. In some ways, you are a complete tzaddik. Oh, well, complete tzaddik, I don't know. Yeah, in some ways, you're a complete tzaddik too. Why? If you look at the totality of the person, do I have a battle within myself? Of course. Am I going to rid myself of a battle in my lifetime? Most probably not, because I'm not right. I'm not completely righteous. Statistically, it's impossible. It's probably impossible. It's definitely impossible. You know what? I'll confess. I'm not completely righteous. I'll put you right there. If there's some areas that I am completely righteous, if there's some areas that you are completely righteous, the answer is of course. If you woke up in the morning and you didn't have an urge to rob a bank, in that area, you're completely righteous. There's no battle for you in that area. If you woke up in the morning and the urge to rob a bank is repulsive to you, you would be disgusted by the act of robbing a bank, then you're a complete tzaddik. Okay? So now the question is not now. So one way to think about it, you could think collectively, am I a tzaddik? No. But you could look in the moment regarding this matter, am I a tzaddik? And yes. Right? If you never tried to murder somebody, if murdering somebody would be repulsive, regarding that, you're a tzaddik. What does it mean you're a tzaddik? Not only, you don't have to, the battlefield is not only your thought, speech, and action. It's not that you wake up in the morning and you really want to kill, but you have to fight with yourself and you have to guard yourself not to kill, not to talk about killing and not to think about killing. That would be a battle in your thought, speech, and action. But you are actually righteous because you don't even want to kill. You're completely righteous. And you're righteous. And if you're repulsed by murder, so you're so disgusted by it because your love to God in this matter is so strong that this would be offensive to you, you're completely righteous.
See, somehow that seems like a very low bar.
Regarding murder. But the question is, could we expand it? I don't want to name names because I don't know what people do. For some people, I know people who were completely not religious to eat bread on Passover, unheard of, impossible. There's somebody else who, even if he doesn't eat bread on Passover, it's a challenge. Right? So regarding this mitzvah, am I a tzaddik or am I a Beinani? Beinani means I'm an intermediary, which means it's a battle. Now I'm going to do the right decision. If I do not control myself, then I'm wicked. But if I control myself and I do the right thing, then I'm a Beinani, I'm intermediary. What does intermediary mean? I'm in complete control of thought, speech, and action, but I'm not in control of my impulses. If I want to eat, do I want to eat a bagel on Passover morning? Of course I want to, but I don't. And I don't think about it. But in other words, I control my thought. I'm not going to fantasize about it because that's just a distraction. So the point here is, yeah, murder is an extreme example, but the point here is in every mitzvah, every act, you can ask yourself, am I in a state where I don't have any battle? Then in this regard, I'm a tzaddik. If I'm in a state that I have a battle and I'm in control, then I'm a Beinani. So that is how even the idea of a tzaddik. So like I said, there's two answers. The first answer is we're saying, this is the tzaddik, don't go for this. And that's the standard. Later, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says a little bit later, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, you have to try to be, okay, we don't want to get to right now. You have to dabble with trying to be a little bit of a tzaddik. But that's not the thrust of the book is no. It's not for you to be a tzaddik. In chapter 14, he says, oh, okay, if you want, you could dabble in it. But the chapter 12, the big chapter 12 is the Beinani is the midah, is the level of every person. That's what you should strive for. Don't strive to be chapter 10, but you have to understand chapter 10 to understand what the Beinani is and what the tzaddik is. And like I said, you can go a little deeper and say, if there's something where I overcame the battle, and not only is my battle not in the action, but I have no desire to do this negativity, then regarding this matter, I'm a tzaddik. Now, if you read enough about the book, happens to be that today's Tanya, we studied the Tanya throughout the year, not just the first 53 chapters, but all 5 sessions of the Tanya. It's divided. We study the whole year, as I mentioned, and we started our class the 19th of Kislev, which was when the new cycle starts. Today's Tanya, chapter 27, basically tells you that I said you're not a tzaddik or a benini. God may prefer the pleasure from the benini. Maybe more pleasurable for me is to be a tzaddik, but for God, there's 2 types of food. There's sweet food and spicy food. Sweet food is the food of the tzaddik. No battle, it's all sweet. And the benini offers spicy food. Spicy food means there's something that's negative, but if you know how to use the spices to spice the dish, it can be tastier than the sweet food. And there's 2 types of pleasures that God receives. So in other words, when I say when you're a benini, it's not like, okay, I'm second class. It's not second class. For the purpose of creation, the drama is with the benini, not with the tzaddik. Tzaddik is he's just in heaven a little too early. In other words, he has a specific mission to add extra light in the world. That's not why the world was created. The world was created for the purpose of the battle, as he was going to explain and elaborate in the remainder of the book. But the conventional interpretation is 11, Tanya chapter 10 is not telling you what to be; it's telling you what not to be. But he's aligning. There is a concept. Is there a concept of somebody who does not have any negative impulses? Yes, there is a concept of a complete tzaddik. Very few. Righteous are very few. Complete tzaddik is even less. But it's not for us. What are we? The benini. Because we can't do anything. We can't rid ourselves of the evil inclination completely. Or we can't rid ourselves of the impulses. All we can do is control thought, speech, and action. That's the tree we should be climbing. Don't be distracted by trying to become something that's impossible. But then, like I said, there's a deeper dimension. The deeper dimension is, in many areas, you are a tzaddik. Certainly an incomplete tzaddik. Some areas, we're all complete tzaddikim. So in that sense, it's sort of another way to look at it. Okay, that's the last story in short, ladies and gentlemen. Now we're going to read the Tanya inside. The end of this chapter, the last couple of lines are a little Kabbalistic, but we'll try to make it through it. The fun begins. But again, please don't hesitate to jump in and question and discuss. It's all good. Okay, we're going back to the lessons in Tanya because the other one becomes a little harder, even though this is a little longer, but we'll try to go through it. Again, the bold is Rabbi Shneur Zalman. The unbold is the words that connect, and then the shaded boxes is commentary. Okay, so here we go. This is the beginning of chapter 10. Okay, Behine, when a person causes his divine soul to prevail over the animal soul, and when he wages war against the animal soul to the extent that he banishes and eradicates, let me just make it a little bigger, its evil from its abode within him, namely the left part of the heart, as it is written, and you shall eradicate the evil from your midst, which implies that one ought to eradicate evil within himself. So the verses eradicate evil from your midst, the Torah talks about that in the context of when a person is guilty of capital crime, you have to implement a punishment, and that's how you eradicate evil from your midst. But the way it's being interpreted here is the righteous person is not eradicating a bad person from your society. It's eradicating the evil from within yourself. That's the job of the righteous person. As to one who achieves this goal, but finds that the evil has nevertheless not actually been converted into good. I'm skipping a little bit. He is called an incomplete tzaddik. So I eradicated the evil, but the evil has not been transformed to good. I'm an incomplete tzaddik. He is also called a tzaddik who knows evil, meaning that some vestige of evil still lingers within him in the left part of his heart, except that it finds no expression at all. Not even in evil desires, because the evil, by reason of its minuteness, is subjugated and nullified by the good and cannot therefore be sensed. Okay, so it's like I said, a toxicity. If there's something in the water, I have water here. There's something that's damaging in here. Probably it's so minute that can't be sensed. So, do I have negativity in my soul if I'm an incomplete righteous man? Yes. Does that negativity, is it strong enough to create a negative impulse? No. Hence, he, the tzaddik, may imagine that he has driven it out and it has quite disappeared. In truth, however, had all the evil in him departed and this appeared, it would have been converted into actual good. We're going to explain that later in the chapter. The explanation of the matter is as follows. A complete tzaddik, in whom the evil has been converted into good, and who was consequently called a tzaddik who knows only good, has attained this level by completely removing his filthy garments from evil. What does it mean he completely removes his filthy garments from evil? So this is a very interesting point. So I'm just going to close the book for a second. Chassidus explains in various places that the animal soul, we say the animal soul is not holy. What part of the animal soul is not holy? The core, the drive for pleasure is neutral. The animal soul, the expression, how that drives for pleasure expresses itself, that's the problem. It expresses itself in the wrong places. So what do you do? So the incomplete tzaddik, the desire for negativity has been so subjugated and so broken apart, it's not strong enough to create an impulse. For the complete tzaddik, it removed the soiled garments from what? From the animal soul. Meaning we take away all negative expression, and now the power of pleasure, the power of desire for pleasure now is actually transformed to good. Because at the core, it was always good. It was just the unholy garments, the soiled garments. Its expression was negative. But the desire for pleasure itself is neutral. And for the righteous person, the animal soul is completely removed its soiled garments, and it now, what does it want? It wants holiness. So that's the meaning of it. It has been transformed to holiness. This means he despises utterly the pleasures of this world, finding it repugnant to derive from them any pleasure which other people derive, namely the pleasure of merely gratifying the physical appetite, instead of using this pleasure toward the service of God. The righteous person cannot tolerate, completely righteous, if you transformed the animal soul entirely, the righteous person cannot tolerate pleasure for its own sake. In other words, just for the person's own appetite. The pleasure must be for the service of God. That is what it wants to do. He despises such pleasures, for they are derived from and receive their spiritual sustenance from the klipa and sitra achra, the very antithesis of holiness. The complete tzaddik utterly hates whatever is of the sitra achra. Why does he hate what is the other side? Because of his great love, a profuse love of delights, and his superior degree of affection for God and his holiness is mentioned above. In other words, because his love to God is so powerful, he can't tolerate the opposite. I'm skipping the commentary, going back to the bold, since they are antithetical. Okay, right? So that's the point. I could love God and something that conceals godliness, and I can love them both at the same time because I have two souls. But if my negative soul was transformed completely, then I would not be able to love God and love something that conceals godliness. So if I sense that if the righteous person senses that he despises something that is antithetical to godliness, that means that his animal soul was completely transformed. So it is written, this is from King David, I hate them with a consuming hatred, says King David, of those who oppose God. They have become enemies to me. Search me, he says to God, and know my heart. Meaning to see. So what does that mean? Hence, according to the abundance of love toward God, so is the extent of hatred toward the spiritual sitra achra, which nurtures the physical pleasures and the other repugnance of the evil of physical pleasures. And this is an interesting point, for repugnance is as much the exact opposite of love as is hatred. Okay, so that's the complete tzaddik. Now we go back. The incomplete tzaddik is he who does not hate the sitra achra, the spiritual klipot, with an absolute hatred. Therefore, he also does not find evil, physical desires and pleasures absolutely repugnant. As long as his hatred and abhorrence for evil are not absolute, perforce he must have retained some vestige of love and pleasure toward it. The filthy garments in which the animal soul has been clothed, meaning as explained above, the evil inclination and the lusting after worldly pleasures, have obviously not been completely shed from him. Therefore, too, the evil of the animal soul has not actually been converted to good, since it still has some hold on the filthy garments, i.e. the desires for pleasure in which the animal soul has previously clothed and expressed itself. So in other words, he has not transformed the evil, because how do I know? What's the test? The test is that he's not repulsed by physical pleasures for their own sake. The problem, but he's still considered righteous because the evil that remains within him is so minute, it's not strong enough to create a negative impulse. Except that this vestige of evil is imperceptible and cannot express itself in evil desires. In other words, the evil that's within his heart is not strong enough to create an evil desire, because the evil is nullified in the good by reason of its minuteness, and it's accounted as nothing. Okay, we'll go to the next paragraph. Indeed, he is therefore called Tzadik Vera Loi, which means not only a Tzadik who knows retains evil, but also a Tzadik whose evil is subjugated and surrendered to him. Vera Loi means bad is to him. So Rabbi Shimon Zalman is learning that and saying, your bad is subjugated and surrendered to you. Perforce then, the fact that he retains some evil indicates that his love to God is also not complete. For a complete love of God would have converted all of the evil within him to good. He is therefore called an incomplete tzaddik. Now we're going to say that incomplete tzaddik, there's many, many levels. A complete tzaddik is no levels. It's absolute. No more evil. Evil has been transformed completely. But if you say there is evil and it has not been transformed, so the degree of the minuteness of the evil within the soul of the incomplete righteous person, there's a spectrum. Now this level, that the incomplete tzaddik who knows evil, is subdivided into myriads of levels, consisting of varying degrees in the quality of the minute remaining evil, deriving from any one of the four evil elements of which the animal soul is composed. We discussed in the beginning, the animal soul has four elements. So one completely righteous person has only a little bit of the element of fire, the other negative element of fire, the other one only a little bit of the negative element of water, right? We said fire is anger. So you can have a righteous person that doesn't have any impulse for anger, but there is a little bit of vestige of that impulse, not of that evil, of that, he calls it the element of fire. So the point here is that when you talk about incomplete tzaddik, there is a whole spectrum and myriad of levels, because how minute is the evil that remains in the soul of the righteous. The subdivision also takes into account the degree of which the remaining evil is nullified in the good because of its minuteness, whether it is 60 times as much good, for example, or in 1,000 or 10,000, and so on. So this recalls the idea of in halacha and Jewish law. So you have Jewish law, you can't mix milk and meat. What happens if you have a big pot of meat and you have one drop of milk that falls into the pot of meat? So does the pot become unkosher? The answer is it depends how much milk is there. If there's 60 times in the meat more than the milk, then the milk is totally nullified. It's there, but it's totally nullified. It's insignificant. Some things, to get rid of the unholy, the problem, you have to have not 60 times more, but 1,000 times more. If teruma, no, some things even 1,000. If teruma is 100, if you have the tithing in times of the temple, it falls into grain that's not tithed, and only a priest could eat the tithed grain, you need 100 times as much. So what we see is the different forms of how minute the negativity has to be in relation to the positivity. So there's a whole spectrum when you talk about the incomplete tzaddik. These various sub-levels are the ranks of incomplete tzaddikim, are the levels of the numerous tzaddikim found in all generations, all of whom belong to the category of incomplete tzaddik. As we find in the Gemara, 18,000 tzaddikim stand before the Holy One, blessed be He. So that's the incomplete tzaddik. So you have evil, you have some evil, because the animal soul has not been transformed, but it's nullified in the sense that a person the incomplete righteous person would not have any impulse for evil, because the evil is too minute to be able to create a tangible impulse. But now we get to the complete tzaddik. But concerning the rank of the complete tzaddik, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's statement applied, I have seen superior men, b'nei aliyah, and they are but few. The reason that the complete tzaddik are called b'nei aliyah, literally men of ascent, is that they convert evil and make it ascend to holiness. As it is similarly written in the introduction to the Zohar, that when Rabbi Chia wished to ascend to the Heichal, heavenly shrine of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he heard the voice come out and say, whichever of you before coming here have converted the darkness of the world to light, holiness, and have transformed the bitter state of their animal soul and evil inclination to sweetness, only these may enter. So what are we saying so far? So far we're saying as follows. The complete tzaddik is called, the complete tzaddik is very few people. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, I saw men of ascent and they are very few. Why are they called men of ascent? And now we have the last two parts of the chapters right here. Why are they called men of ascent? The first interpretation is consistent with what we said so far, because they transform the animal soul and raise it. Not only do they nullify it, but they actually raise it. They transform it and raise it. And the animal soul itself, the drive of the animal soul becomes a drive for holiness. And that's why they're called men of ascent, because they raise up the animal soul. That's one definition of why they're called men of ascent. We have one more. Men of ascent, the second definition is going to be, when they serve God not for their own sake to become close to God, but for the sake of heaven. And that's what B'nai Aliyah, men of ascent, is not the perfect translation. Men of elevation, which means they're serving God not for themselves, but for the elevated one, for God, as he's going to explain. Another reason for their designation as B'nai Aliyah, why they're called B'nai Aliyah, because even their divine service in the area of doing good, in their fulfillment of Torah and its mitzvot, is for the sake of above. B'nai Aliyah means the sons of above. So before we translated it, men of ascent, people of ascent. Here it's people of above, meaning everything they do in the service of God is not for themselves, but it's for the sake of above, and their service is directed toward a most high level, toward the loftiest heights. The divine service is not intended merely to attach themselves to God by serving him through Torah and mitzvot, so as to quench their thirst of their soul with thirst for God. In other words, I could study Torah and do mitzvot because I'm thirsty, I want to connect to God. It's a very high level. That's an incomplete tzaddik. The complete tzaddik serves God not for their own desire, even the holy desire, but for God's own purpose. God, for the purpose of God, to fulfill God's will. As it is written, Ho exclaims the prophet, all who are thirsty for godliness should go to the waters of Torah, i.e. let them engage in Torah, which is likened to water, as it explained elsewhere, that the thirsty ones of this verse refers to for those who first thirst for godliness. In other words, some people study Torah because they want to come close to God. Why? Because they're thirsty. They're thirsty. They want their soul. They have love to God, and they have to quench the thirst. That's an incomplete righteous person. The completely righteous person has 2 points. Number one, he creates transformation. His animal soul itself wants to become close to God. So therefore, the animal soul itself is totally repulsed by evil. And that's why we call it men of ascent, because they elevate the animal soul and make it holy. This, in other words, not only nullify, but make it holy. The second point that we're saying here is they also serve God, not for their own sake, but for the sake of the one above. Why am I serving God? Not because I want to feel close to God, but because that's God's will. And now we're going to explain, rather their service of God is as Tikkunei Zohar, which is a section of the Zohar explains, that which our sages have said, who is a pious one, Chasid, who is benevolent, mitchased, toward his creator, Kono. The Tikkunei Zohar comments that Kono, usually translated as his creator, is here to be interpreted as his nest, derived from the word ken, nest. And thus the Chasid is he who is benevolent with its nest, i.e. the source of God. This benevolence toward God consists of uniting the Holy One, blessed be he, with his Shekhinah, the divine presence, so that the light of this union reaches and be felt even in the lowest worlds. In other words, this is Kabbalistic terminology to explain why is the Chassid, why is the completely righteous person, why does he serve God? For God's nest. Nest is a home. God wants a home in this world. So why am I serving God? Why is the righteous person completely serving God completely? Not for his own sake, because I want to become close to God, but because God wants to be present in this world. God wants a nest in this world. God wants a home in this world. So I do it for the sake of God. As it is also explained in Raya Mehemna, also a section of the Zohar, on Parshas Teitzei, in a manner of a son who exerts himself for his father and mother, whom he loves more than himself, more than of his own nefesh, ruach, and neshama, and who sacrifices his life to their sake to redeem them should they be held in captivity, and as is also explained elsewhere. In other words, he says, the completely righteous person, when he's serving God, it's like a child serving God for serving their parents, not for his own sake, but for the parents' sake. Sometimes I go and spend time with my parents because we both enjoy the experience. Sometimes I do it specifically for their sake, and that's the completely righteous person. So far we have 2 definitions of the completely righteous person. Number 1, transforms the evil inclination. So he creates the transformation. And number 2, that he serves for the purpose of God. And not for his own desire, but it's for the sake of God. And now we're going to have a little Kabbalistic interpretation. It's a little Kabbalistic, so I'm not sure I understand it. A few lines to explain that these 2 ideas are interdependent. That in order to that the idea of transformation of evil and serving God, making a home for God in this world are interdependent. So let's see how he does this here. Both interpretations are complementary. For by refining the good found in Klipat Noga, as the men have assent to, by converting their animal soul, which is derived from Klipat Noga, to good, one elevates feminine waters, man in the language of the Kabbalah, effecting unions in the higher realms so as to cause masculine waters, mad, to descend to this world. Okay, this is very Kabbalistic. Kabbalistic, there's the feminine waters, which is ma, and there's masculine waters, which is mad. And if you want to bring down the masculine waters, you have to raise feminine waters. So I'm going to try to explain this. These masculine waters are the waters of kindness that flow into and are contained in each of the 248 positive mitzvot, which are all the nature of kindness or benevolence and masculine waters. This term, masculine waters, is applied to mitzvot, means that the mitzvot draw God's holiness from above, i.e. from the higher realms downward, so that God's holiness be clothed in and revealed within the lowest realms, i.e. our physical world, as explained elsewhere. Thus, the two interpretations of the term men of ascent are complementary. That's sort of, and it's in brackets in the Tanya, sort of parenthetically, but we'll spend a minute or two on the waters, the feminine waters and masculine waters. So according to the Kabbalah, masculine is the metaphor for the giver, and feminine is the metaphor for the recipient. So when the flow comes from above to below, it's masculine, the giver. When the recipient elevates itself, when the world elevates itself, that's feminine. We're the recipient, we get the light from God, but the recipient can raise and inspire the masculine to give. It's also true in physical romantic relationships. Biologically, the male is the one who gives, but the female is the one who inspires and entices the male to give. So the same thing is over here. When a Jew in this world, we are the feminine waters. When we raise and elevate the physicality of this world, what we are doing is we're enticing God to bring down more light. Right? Because the feminine waters inspire the masculine waters. So the point here is, Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying, the more you transform darkness to light, the more your mitzvah brings God into this world, creating the nest for God. So these were the two definitions of Bnei Aliyah, men of ascent. Number one is they transform the dark. They transform the animal soul and raise it to holiness. And number two is that they serve God, not for their own sake, but to bring God into this world, which is God's will. So we're saying these 2 points go together. Feminine waters, transformation of the physical, of the animal soul, raises feminine waters, and that inspires even more masculine waters to bring God and invest God into this world, making this world a home for God. So this is, in short, we finished 3 minutes early. This is the story in short. Again, the main point here is to say, like Bob points out, this is not what we're supposed to be doing. We're not in the business of not having any negative impulses. That's not our mission. That's not our purpose. That's not our design. And we shouldn't try to do there. We shouldn't try to go there. And you know what? We shouldn't be frustrated when we're not there. That's the big key. When you get to chapter 26, when he starts talking about the how to remain joyous within this battle. And there's a big frustration. People say, I'm still dealing with the same stuff. I'm still dealing with the same impulses 50 years in, 40 years in. And the answer is, don't get frustrated, because this is exactly why you were created for. So Tanya chapter 10 is basically saying there's a select few people who have reached this level. They have a different path, but that's not the path for the average person. On the other hand, as we will see later, we could learn a little bit from the Tzadik, because Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to say this point, to serve God, not for my own will, not for my own benefit, not for my own thirst, but to do the will of God. We can incorporate some of that into our life, because that's also the root. That is what our godly soul wants to do. So even though we can't do it completely, but part of us wants to do that. So in other words, we have certain tastes of the tzaddik experience because we have a godly soul. We're not a tzaddik because we also have an animal soul. But can we understand the perspective of the tzaddik? In a sense, yes, because part of us is that way. That's what I'm saying. In some sense, your godly soul is completely dominated. And not only are you not going to do an act against God's will, but you don't even want to do an act against God's will. Okay, in that area, you're incomplete tzaddik. Your godly soul dominates not just the thought, speech, and action, but also your heart, also your impulses. And there are many areas that way. There are many areas in a way you're a complete tzaddik. There's a joke about a yeshiva student who was totally sheltered, totally secluded, and in the world of Torah, and he hears all about people say, you sin, this temptation to sin. He had no idea, never experienced the temptation to sin. So one day he says, I got to try this. Everyone's talking about temptation to sin. I got to try it. So he says, okay, what is one of the worst sins in the Torah? Happens to be eating chaylev, eating certain fats of the animal is a terrible sin. Karet, it's a terrible sin. So he says, okay, so where am I going to get it? I'm living in a small town in Eastern Europe. Oh, the candle that was giving the light was made of the fats of the animal. And this is like real chaylev. This is like a terrible, terrible sin. So he grabs the candle and he bites into it. And it's disgusting. And he says, this is what everyone's attracted to? Disgusting. I'm going back to learning my Talmud. So that's the joke. The joke is that everybody has some areas that for you, the negativity is this, you have no drive to that at all. And in that sense, you're a tzaddik. In that area, if you isolate that experience, you're a tzaddik. Because again, what is the definition of a tzaddik? Definition of a tzaddik is that is the dominance of the animal soul, of the godly soul, is not only on the thought, speech, and action, but also in the level of the heart, also on the impulse level. So if you have no impulse for negativity, you are a incomplete tzaddik. If not only you have no impulse to negativity, but you've been completely transformed, that every part of you is in line with God on this question, and the test is that I'm actually repulsed by the negativity. Oh, then in that area, I'm a complete tzaddik. So you asked me, is Tanya chapter 10 relevant? Simple, in other words, the correct answer is no. But the answer is also that in some sense we could learn from Tanya chapter 10 and see that in certain areas we are a tzaddik. But though that doesn't mean that I should try to replicate that to my full personality and say, oh, I already did it. I don't want to rob a bank. So maybe I can get to a point where I don't want any negativity. No, that's a mistake. That means you got to learn 2 chapters down. You got to learn chapter 12, not chapter 10. Okay, that's the story in short. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, I think you partially answered that question, because I also was struggling with what we can learn from, for example, incomplete tzaddik. And my question is, when do you categorize the person, at the beginning of the life or at the end of the life? Because the work that incomplete tzaddik is doing may be something that we can learn from,
right.
Or because his desire is very small, so maybe something that we can learn from as far as working on himself. So hopefully by the end of life, our category will be a little.
So I think that the question is at every moment, because we'll get to that later. When the Alter Rebbe says anyone could be a Beinoni, it's at the moment. At the moment, right now, am I a person who is in control of only my thought, speech, and action, only of my garments? Or am I a person that is the godly soul is so dominant within my personality that it's unthinkable that I should have an impulse for negativity? And that's the question of what I am now. Now, I could be a wicked person, and in an instant, I could be transformed to a complete tzaddik. In other words, the Alter Rebbe says, if you do teshuvah, at this point, if I'm experiencing intense love to God, at this moment, I'm a tzaddik, right? So it all depends on how, it all depends on what are we looking at? If we're looking at the collective personality, you look at right now. Right now, what's my state? Am I a state of a person that, again, the key difference is, am I somebody who, if I'm a Beinoni, I'm in control of my thought, speech, and action. If I'm a tzaddik, I have no negative impulse, because the emotions of the godly soul overtook and either nullified or transformed the emotion of the animal soul. At every state, what is my state right now? Tomorrow, even if I sin in a minute, the next minute I could be a Beinoni, as we will see in chapter 12. But then you want to say, as a whole, could you be a person that I'm not complete tzaddik, but over time I become a complete tzaddik? Yeah, King David, in Tanya chapter 1, when he brings an example of complete tzaddik, David HaMelech, King David is a complete tzaddik. He says, "V'libi chalal b'kirbi," my heart is hollow within me. The Talmud says he has no yetzer hara, he has no evil inclination. Now, anyone who ever opened the Bible, you see that David had an evil inclination. He sinned with Bathsheba. Even if you want to say anyway how you want to sweeten the deal, sweeten the sin, the King David is certainly somebody who had negative impulses. But over time, he became a complete tzaddik. because of the repentance for Bathsheba and his fasting, and it's not that we should fast, but that's the way they did Teshuvah in those days. But the Talmud says, he killed his evil inclination through fasting. So the point here is he was able to transform the negative, that he moved from being a person who was not a tzaddik to a person who being a tzaddik. Should we be like him? The short answer is no. Should we try at certain moments to feel like a tzaddik temporarily? That I should really try to cultivate an intense love to God? Yes. Why? Because that's really how your godly soul feels. Am I going to be able to experience that all the time? Because my animal soul not going to reawaken? Of course not. Your animal soul is here to stay too, if you're an average person. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to feel what your tzaddik would feel like in the moment, which is basically feel like your godly soul feels like if your animal soul went to sleep. And we'll read about that in chapter 12 and 13. Sometimes your animal soul goes to sleep. He just had too much chocolate. He had too much chocolate. He's going to sleep now. So now he gives you a few minutes. Now, in these few minutes, you can cultivate the feeling of a tzaddik. You can cultivate a love to God. And your animal soul is asleep. So we'll get to that. The sleeping animal soul. We get to that later, chapter 13. Go ahead, Bob.
Just an overview question. You may have answered this the first episode of our chapter 1. When you look at a historical perspective, you have the Torah, and then suddenly you have the Gaonim, and you have the Talmud and the oral tradition, and then 1,000 years later, whatever, you get Maimonides, who, in addition to his medical practice, which would run circles around me, suddenly decides to write the Mishnah, Torah, and the Guide to the Perplexed.
Right.
What motivated the Alter Rebbe? What was there lacking at that moment in time to inspire the Alter Rebbe to take on such a tremendous task? And when's the next one coming up? I mean, do we look historically for gaps or voids? What motivated him?
So that's a very hard question to answer, because the general questions are the hardest ones to answer. The simple answer is that you have to think of it in the context of the Hasidic movement in general. Hasidic movement in general is a little before, 2 generations before Rabbi Shneur Zalman, you have the Baal Shem Tov. And there was a complete gap and void in the sense that the Jewish people needed inspiration. And the Hasidic movement comes and gives inspiration to the masses. And it does a phenomenal job. People today, the historians cannot understand how the Hasidic movement traveled, how the Hasidic ideas, Hasidism traveled throughout a vast amount of territory in such short period of time. In one generation, it went from one person to hundreds of thousands or more people, and in a wide variety of areas. So it caught like wildfire, which tells you there was a void and there was a need, and people were thirsting for this knowledge. Okay. Now, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he came from Lithuania, and Lithuania, they were less interested in the inspiration, and everything had to be intellectual. That was the culture. Now you have Rabbi Shneur Zalman coming to the Hasidic movement. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, there's a lot of inspiration, a lot of good ideas floating around here, helping a lot of people, but we need to systemize this, right? We have to figure out, we can't just have a collection of ideas, we have to really make it into a system. And that's the school of Chabad, wisdom, understanding, knowledge. It's wisdom. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. It's systemizing it, and that's what he did. So he wasn't necessarily coming in a vacuum, because he was really presenting the works of Hasidism, which itself is based on Kabbalah. But you say it's the right person at the right time. Rabbi Shneur Zalman coming to the Hasidic movement does a service for it that the other Hasidic masters didn't do, not because they didn't necessarily see the need for that, because culturally they were coming from a different place. So what Rabbi Shneur Zalman is doing is saying, could we take the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, which is rooted on teachings of the Kabbalah, and help give people a systematic how-to guide? And so the big idea, the big revelation is the Hasidic movement. And within the Hasidic movement, you have the revelation of the Chabad movement, which is a specific way to live the Hasidic ideals. So in that sense, yeah, the answer is yes to all your questions. Was there a specific void before the Hasidic movement? Yes. Did the Hasidic movement fill the void? Yes. Did it fill it in it filled in multiple ways. And one of those ways were the Chabad way, and the Chabad way is the systemization of the Hasidic teachings. Now, the question is, will there be another big burst of Jewish renaissance? The answer is, of course, and we're all waiting for it. It's Mashiach. In other words, even what is we learned in the Song of Songs, so second verse, Yishakeni minashichas piyu, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, says Rashi. We're waiting for Mashiach, and when Mashiach comes, God will kiss us with the kisses of the mouth, meaning he will reveal to us the secrets of the Torah. In other words, the giving of the Torah was God kissing us. And the secrets of the Torah will be God kissing us again at the giving of when Mashiach comes. Now, every revelation in Judaism, from the giving of the Torah till now, is another stage of the kiss. And hopefully we'll get to the ultimate kiss. But historically, even before we got to the ultimate kiss, every now and then, because either there's two ways to look at it. There's two ways to look at it. One way to look at it is because the darkness is so bad, we need more light. That's one way to look at it. By the way, both ways to look at it is true. So Maimonides, when things become dark, you need more light. That's the Arizal after the Spanish expulsion and the Hasidic movement after Chmielnicki. The bottom line here is the more dark, the more light. But together with that, there's another track, which is as time passes, we're getting closer to the ultimate kiss, to the revelation of Mashiach. So as preparation for the ultimate kiss, the ultimate revelation of Judaism that will happen, the secrets of the Torah that will happen when Mashiach comes, so we get tastes of that. So it's both true. Historically, it's both true with the darkness. Post-darkness, there's more light. And mystically speaking, we're all moving forward to the big kiss, the ultimate kiss.
Well, now that you're 40, you better start writing our next guide.
Okay, well, we have to first you got to figure out everything that is written, and then you could see if you could add anything. But that's how the Song of Songs and the Tanya come together, because that's what Rashi says, that the whole, we're waiting for the kiss, and the Hasidim say that the revelation of the Kabbalah, starting with the Arizal, where Arizal says now it became an obligation to disseminate the wisdom of the Kabbalah, which Hasidism is a way of doing that. That's a taste, that's a preparation, a prelude to the Mashiach. As the Hasidim say, Friday afternoon is an obligation according to the code of law that you have to taste the food of Shabbat. There's a verse in Psalms that says, those who taste it will merit life. It simply means when you taste the Torah, you merit life. But the code of law says, simply speaking, Shabbat food is holy. Friday afternoon, you go into the kitchen and they're cooking up Shabbat food, you have to taste it. So Kabbalistic interpretation is that Shabbat food, Mashiach comes, the 7th millennium, Mashiach comes, that's the revelation of the secrets of the Torah. But you can't wait for Friday night before you eat the Shabbos food. Friday afternoon, when it's still the weekday, before Shabbos, you already have to start tasting the dishes. And that's the Kabbalistic knowledge, that we start tasting the food we're still not in the time of ultimate holiness. Shabbat is ultimate holiness. We're still in the weekday. We're still in exile. But we have the preparation to get us in the mood to prepare us that we taste the food of the Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy. That's the story in short. It's 11:12. It's late. You have to get ready for Shabbos. You have to taste the food, and so everyone should have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos. And next week we meet again to read about the wicked person, but that may be a little hard. I'll come back to next week and read about the Beinoni, and then we'll all be happy. Okay.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.
Take care.
Thank